Good morning, Top Ropers. As Eric just said at the top of the show, I'm TRR contributor Doug Berrill, and I'll be taking the reins today. And a big reason for that is the nature of our guest. As any follower of the website knows, I'm sort of the resident WCW guy. And today, I'm grateful to be joined by Ray Lloyd, a gentleman who will be best known by wrestling communities for his time in World Championship Wrestling as Glacier. So first of all, we're really appreciative of you taking a little time with us, so we thank you for that, and let me keep it really simple out of the gate. How's life?
Well, Doug, let me say thanks for having me on, man. Things are good. Things are really, really good. I'm down here in Orlando, Florida, living down here, and, I kind of made my way here. I decided back when we were in WCW, and we used to come down to Universal to tape the WCW Pro Show. We would come down and we would tape like 10 days in a row. We'd tape a bunch of episodes and maybe just air them periodically. And man, I just loved Orlando. So I remember saying to myself way back then, like one of these days I'm going to move to Orlando. And if I get to Florida, I kind of feel like I made it.
That's right.
So here I am, and of course I had no way of knowing back then that this would kind of become the epicenter of wrestling again, which is just a perfect match for me, So yeah, life's good.
Very good. Well, hey, you're in Orlando. Do you have any plans for WrestleMania weekend? Because that's down there this year.
You know what? I'm booked for WrestleCon, the big convention that will be here, I think, Thursday through Sunday. I got a Saturday appearance and a Sunday morning appearance. And then, one of my very best friends, I just saw him last week, down in Dallas Stage, and, looks like he's going to be going into the Hall of Fame. So I'm hoping he might, drag me along to a couple of things that we can. Let's see.
That's really funny because I had a question about Dallas because I know that he was influential when when you started not wrestling but started as Glacier. So maybe we'll get into that in just a minute. But because speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about your start because on a number of levels, I feel like you have a very unique firsthand perspective on the wrestling business, and some of that has to do with time frame. And while almost anyone listening to this knows of the Glacier persona that debuted in 1996, no one just falls out of the sky and lands on television as a professional wrestler, right? So I know that
right.
I know that you had started cutting your teeth, years prior to that, and I also know that you have a background in both martial arts and football. So this is kind of a, what came first, the chicken or the egg thing. Was professional wrestling always a consideration of yours? And if not, how did it come about?
You know what, Doug, not really. I mean, I yes and no, I guess. I grew up in, my twin brother and I, we grew up in Brunswick, Georgia, which is on the southeast coast of Georgia. It's about an hour below Savannah. It's about an hour north of Jacksonville. So my dad was a big wrestling fan, and so he would take us to the Jacksonville Coliseum, to watch, Florida Championship Wrestling, or Championship Wrestling from Florida. I always say it wrong. And that's where I really fell in love with wrestling, with, watching Dusty and Flair and Jack and Jerry Briscoe and all those guys. And, but as a kid, I think most kids during that era, that 70s era, pretty much, I think at one point, every kid I knew wanted to be a wrestler at some point, because, wrestlers were kind of like real-life superheroes, and so, if you were a kid, you either wanted to be a wrestler or you wanted to be Evel Knievel, and like I said, at least all the kids I knew. And so my brother and I always, we used to make believe, and it's funny, I just met Jerry Briscoe for the first time a month ago. I told him the story, is we used to dream of being the Briscoe brothers, and I always say, we didn't dream of being like the Briscoe brothers, we dreamed of being the Briscoe brothers.
Oh.
And we wanted to be like, the tag team champions of the world and everything. And but as we got older, I was concentrating more on football and martial arts and things like that, and it was still something that I loved wrestling as a fan. But as I got through high school and started into college, it never dawned on me to actually maybe pursue being a professional wrestler. And I always tell people this, and it's the God's honest truth. I really thought, I was like, there's no way I'm tough enough to do that. Even though I kind of lived a pretty tough life already with sports and martial arts. But I just always thought of guys like Arn Anderson and people like that were just, I just knew were like tough as nails. And I was like, man, if I ever had to go up against those guys, they'd just murder me, So so it was kind of like one of those things where I kept it in the back of my head, but I never really actively thought about pursuing it, especially when I was in college. And then luckily I met who's now a great friend of mine, a guy named Fred Avery, who was a kind of a journeyman wrestler, a big gruff guy, and they actually taped a small regional television show in Valdosta, Georgia, where I went to college at Valdosta State University, and you know, and like most college kids, you know, some of the football players and baseball players, we get together and they actually would tape it on Saturday morning and like air it Saturday afternoon, and you know, we go down there and act like a bunch of idiots, you know, and and through that, I kind of got to meet Fred, and you know, back then he looked like he was a lot older than me, but he, in reality, he was only a few years older than me, and so you know, eventually, you know, I was, you know, school was getting ready to, I was getting ready to graduate, and you know, and he basically started talking to me and one of my teammates about, you know, we always talked about wrestling, and he said, you know, you guys, if you're serious about, you know, maybe looking into it, you know, I've got a ring, and the guy who trained me comes over like twice a week and works with me, and if you guys want to give this a try. And I was like, heck no, man, I can't do that. And thank God that he believed in me. And because, you know, and I always tell Fred this, I mean, if Fred wouldn't have believed in me enough, because I really didn't think there was something I could do, and if he wouldn't have believed in me, you know, I hate to think, you know, that my life would be without wrestling, you know, but it probably would have been. And we trained, and man, we trained like 5 months straight. I mean, and this is before wrestling schools, you know, so I mean, and Fred was a very, very accomplished amateur wrestler, and he put us through the ringer. I mean, it was you know, that was 86, the summer of '86, right before my senior year. And the funny thing is, I just figured that out about 6 months ago. Like, I always thought it was April of '87 when I started, and then I saw a picture that someone sent me, and it was March of '87, and I was like, and we were already wrestling. I was like, holy cow, I was off by a year.
Oh my goodness.
So this April, instead of it being my 30th anniversary in the wrestling business, it will be my 31 years in the business.
Well, you missed the party for the first one.
Yeah, yeah, no, I missed the 30th anniversary. I was like, holy, what the hell, you know? But you know, you know, I was so fortunate, and this is one of the things I think that maybe you were, you know, adhering to, is that I got a chance, and when we broke in, you know, in that spring, you know, early summer of '86, I got a chance those first few years to actually experience kind of the last part of the territories, and the legitimate, real territories, and I'm telling you, I learned so much in the first 3 years just from being able to work with guys that were stars, you know, that were kind of on the downhill side of their career, who were working still, you know, 3 and 4 nights a week, and I got to do that. I was finishing up college. Obviously, during football season, we didn't do much, and then, you know, after football season, we both, my former teammate and tag team partner, his name was R.D. Swain, I mean, we jumped in full force, and I mean, you know, I graduated in June of '87. I started teaching school, and I was wrestling every single weekend I could be on the road, which is pretty much every weekend, and then it kind of you know, grew from there, you know. So,
well, yeah, you know, and you were talking about kind of the evolution of that timing, and you were talking about kind of really, you know, being there to see firsthand, you know, the back end of the territory days, and talking a little bit about, well, you know, there weren't wrestling schools per se, you know, at that time, and so, you know, it actually kind of jumps right in, like, I imagine in those early years, now you said you had a job teaching, but you were also wrestling, and so I was going to say, I imagine wrestling wasn't exactly paying the bills, so I'm sure teaching was paying the bills and wrestling was more of a passion project. But
yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, for like the younger guys these days, I don't know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on the current independent wrestling scene? Because I don't know if it's just here in the Northeast, but I'd argue it's on an uptick. And you know, what do you think about the opportunities for young kids these days now?
You know, that's a great question. I do a lot of wrestling seminars now, and that's one of the things I cover is that, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, the first thing I tell anyone is that, you know, that first off, and Paige, I heard Paige say this several years ago when a young wrestler asked him, you know, a question, and basically like, what did it take to make it in wrestling? And, you know, and you know, the first thing I tell everybody is, I thought there was a secret formula too, and I'm telling you, there's just not. It's not a secret formula. I mean, is there that one in a million person who gets discovered, right out of the gate? Of course. But that's very, very rare. That's like seeing Bigfoot. It rarely happens. And that's I always tell people too. If you're going to pursue this, for God's sake, pursue it for the right reasons. Pursue it because it is your wholehearted passion. Because if this is not your wholehearted passion, I mean, this business will break your heart over and over and over. Really, just like a lot of businesses will, especially anything where you're in front of the public eye. I mean, there's going to be a lot of criticism. There's going to be a lot of critique, and you got to be able to take all that. And if you're not doing it for the right reasons, then you'll just end up becoming a bitter old wrestler. And I always say, the world's got enough of those. We don't need any more of those. We need more wrestlers who just do this for the sake of doing it, no matter how it ends. No matter how it ends, or comes out. And I'm a big, Paige, always laughs at me. He calls me the king of quotes because I have a lot of quotes, but that's how I remember lessons, And one of the ones that I tell young wrestlers is, I always say, it's okay to want the fame and the fortune. You just can't want that first.
Absolutely.
Because 99% of the people, and it literally is a one in a million shot. 99% of the people that ever, pursue this will never make it to where they're making a full-time living doing this, whether that's working for, one of the wrestling companies or eventually WWE or NXT or whatever. And so if you can, and that's what Paige said, if you can do that, pursue that knowing that the odds are stacked incredibly against you and still go up and do that week after week, month after month, year after year, and not get bitter, then pursue it. But if there's any ounce inside of you that says, I don't know if I can do that and not get bitter, it's probably best not to do this. Because, I mean, it is a long, hard road. And it's, we got the indie scene itself. It's the same old problem that's always been there. Is I think it's been watered down because, it's like anything. Being a musician, a singer, a wrestler, whatever. When you're trying to cut your teeth and just kind of make a name for yourself, you're not going to get paid a lot because, quite frankly, you're not worth a lot to the paying customer and to the promoter because no one knows who you are yet. So, and I don't mean that as you don't have any self-worth, obviously. I just mean as a marketable item. So I understand when people work for lower paydays, but I think what's really killed the independent scene, one, is the fact that, you can go on the internet and you can buy whatever you need, to dress like a wrestler and then call yourself a wrestler.
Right.
And I would say a vast majority of the people that I see on independent shows, I can watch someone, and I'm not saying that I'm all that. I'm just saying I've been taught by some of the best, so I know what to look for. I can literally watch someone walk to the ring and pretty much tell what level of ability and skill they have just by watching their entrance and watching how they get in the ring, how they respect the ring. Before they ever even lock up, I can pretty much have a pretty, educated guess as to where they're going to fall in the pecking order. As far as just presentation and gimmick and everything, but and believability, and that's my big thing. But the it's the age-old thing of promoters are not willing to pay anybody, and then you get guys who work way too long for free, and it's you get what you pay for, a lot of times. And I always, one of the things I say in the seminar, that my seminars that I say to, and once again, this is something that was told to me, and it was a hard selection that I had to learn when this was first told to me, is I look at everyone and I tell every young wrestler that I talk to this. I tell them, I ask them, I said, I want you to, next time, as soon as you leave this conversation and you get in front of a mirror, I want you to look in that mirror, and I want you to ask yourself, would you pay to see you wrestle? And then ask yourself, how much would you pay to see you wrestle? And those are hard questions to ask yourself. But they need to be asked because I think people sometimes don't realize that, people are going to, the economy's hard. It takes a lot for people to go out and spend their money, especially if they're going to take a family to a wrestling show.
Absolutely.
So, they want to get them, I always say, give them more than their money's worth, but yeah, so that was kind of a long explanation of that. But yeah, the indies, I think, like you said, I think they're making a little bit of a comeback. There's some strong organizations that weren't there. I'm seeing a lot around here in Florida, obviously, just because kind of osmosis.
Right.
With NXT being here, but yeah, and I have a lot of hope. The one thing that I do see, and I want to say this just because this is one of the things that is always on. It's one of the things I always try to share with anybody who's in the wrestling business right now is there's a lot of people, and I'm one of them, who is not a fan of the current product that WWE puts out. And I've got a lot of really good friends that work for WWE, especially behind the scenes. So I'm not taking a stab at WWE as a whole. I'm just saying that I'm not a big fan of the in-ring product.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of all the skits and the behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, because you just have people who are not professional actors trying to pull off what professional actors need to be doing. And so I always say is just because you're going out and imitating what you see on TV doesn't necessarily mean that's the right way to do it. As far as, I've always said, learn the traditional way of wrestling, and that will never, ever, or will always serve you well.
They can never take that away from you.
Right, and then they can teach you the WWE way, so to speak. Because the cream will rise to the top. I don't care who you are. I mean, if you're good enough, they will find out about you. But the thing is, people, they go out and they imitate. And I unfortunately, I blame all the other wrestling promotions that are on TV as well. We don't have to name them because if anybody that follows wrestling knows what they are. And listen, I'm glad they're there. I'm glad it's a place for people to work. But all they're doing is imitating what WWE is doing. And I feel like that's cheating the talent because everyone has gotten, and I talk to I talk to a lot of very well respected legendary wrestlers on a regular basis, and they all say the same thing: is you have to learn how to work in front of a house show crowd because those are your meat and potato matches that when you're on tour you've got to be able to. You can't do necessarily that high risk TV match or pay per view match every night. You can't bet 1,000 every night. So you got to be able to tell a story. You got to be able to dial it back and still entertain the people. And that's what a lot of people don't know how to do now. And that's why you're seeing so many injuries too. Is people don't know how to do the a quote unquote house show match. And so yeah, that's my one concern, I guess, about the business is from the indie level on up.
Sure, and what's interesting because you talk about the WWE style, and there's plenty of industry veterans, that have spoken about the WWE style and how that all trickles down. And so it's kind of, for me, I don't even have an opinion on this. So this is open-ended, because now these days, because you were talking about, back in the day, wrestling school wasn't a big thing. And I want to talk about, I know you spent some time working at the WCW power plant. And like these days, this big, behemoth, WWE, they're dumping a lot of money into a performance center and investing into, it is a developmental brand. Granted, there are plenty of performers who have worked in professional wrestling for 15 years who are on the developmental brand, so you can kind of take that with a grain of salt. But but in terms of like training people in the performance center, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about the power plant, because that strikes me as like the performance center before the performance center was ever a thing. And if you are a young wrestler coming up, do you think that that's a good route to go, or do you think it backs you into like one mold, one corner? Would you recommend to a young wrestler to try and pursue that route, or do you think that going over and working with different kind of promotions and different experiences, what do you think is better?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that, and this is one thing that just absolutely amazes me is how many guys and girls, they get their basic training and they somehow think, and I don't know if this is, I hate to sound like my dad, but like the kids these days, but and I think maybe that just with age comes wisdom, so I certainly hope so. But I see so many young wrestlers who they get their basic training, and most of the time that's not even what they need. Whoever trained them didn't train them properly. But it's like I always say, you don't know what you don't know. If you think you're being trained properly, you have no idea. If you're a greenhorn, you don't know if you've been trained right or not. And you get out there, I'm amazed at how many young wrestlers think that they got it all figured out. And I can't. I mean, it amazes me, like when someone like an Al Snow or Bill DeMont or Les Thatcher or anybody of that stature does a seminar and they charge freaking Tom Pritchard, and they charge $20 or $30. I mean, that's an unbelievable steal to pick these people's brain for a day, and people just won't do it. It just absolutely blows my mind, And so that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give. I heard Jim Cornette say this years ago, and people ask me, they say like, well, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And I give them a couple things. I said, here's the last thing you need to remember: show up everywhere. everywhere that has anything to do with pro wrestling, show up. I don't care. And, of course, always have your gear. You know, whether it's not even a show or not, just have your gear. You have no idea when it will come in handy. But it's just like, you know, you got to put yourself out there. You got to be a sponge. And you've got to learn from as many people as you can. And I just had this conversation with Steve Kern just a few weeks ago. Okay, and I asked him, I said, Steve, like, you know, I work with some people now. I kind of handpick a couple of people that I kind of mentor. And it usually takes me a long time to pick someone because I have to kind of watch them from afar because I'm at that point to where, like I said, you know, I've learned from, been, you know, so fortunate to learn from some of the very best. I mean, you know, Lou Dez and Dusty Rhodes were the two that really, you know, mentored me through my career. And I'm amazed when I say Lou Dez at a seminar, how many people don't even know who he is, you know? But
yeah, right.
But you know, it's like I asked Steve because I wanted to know. I was like, Steve, like, you know, I know you know, like, how do you handle when someone comes and says, hey, I want to learn how to do this? How do you teach them? Do you teach them more the traditional way? Do you teach them the quote-unquote WWE way? Or how do you handle that, you know? And I think that's kind of what you're asking. And he just said, you know what? He said, you know, once you learn it, like we've learned it, then it kind of becomes an opinion thing. Like, you know, you look at the person and you teach them what you feel they need to learn. And then, you know, you just remind them, okay, that, like, and it's kind of what I said earlier, the cream is going to rise to the top. If you're good enough talent, and whether that is, usually it's a mixture. It's a mixture of athletic ability. It's a mixture of look. You know, if you can talk, that puts you way ahead of the game because more and more that's an equally important thing. Now it's a necessity. I mean, if you can't talk, you're pretty much dead in the water, even if you have everything else. And but you know, it's like Dusty always called it the X factor. You know, if you don't have that intangible charisma that you can't really teach. I mean, I think I've changed my mind on that over the years. I think you can kind of somehow teach a little bit of the charisma, but there needs to be a good natural presence of that already. And if you don't, and I've seen people who have everything else, but they just don't have the charisma. And when they don't have the charisma, man, it's just kind of dead in the water, you know. So, and the biggest thing is what I would say is get around as many veterans as you can, and ask for honest evaluation, and shut up and listen to what they say. You know, and don't dispute what they're saying. Just listen to what they say. Take what you feel is usable and valuable. And if there's something, you know, that say you listen to half a dozen people, like an Al Snow, a Les Thatcher, a Tom Pritchard, and someone tells you something that doesn't quite measure up with them, but it sounds good for you, give it a shot. But just understand, I mean, you know, kind of go with the averages, you know. Yeah. People who know what they're talking about usually talk along the same lines, you know. So that's one of my big things is get in front of as many people as you can that you know what they're talking about, and pick their brain, because I don't know one of those people, me included, who doesn't like to sit down and talk wrestling. I mean, if I know there's a couple of kids that we did WrestleCade. I did WrestleCade last year, not this year, and I sat down with the Heat Seekers, Elliot and Matt Sigmund, those guys, and you know they've won the NWA World Tag Team titles a couple times, you know, and a couple of their friends, and man, we just talked wrestling for probably, I don't know, 2-3 hours, and as much as I enjoyed it, I had no idea how much they got out of it, you know, and you know, just I love sharing what I know, because if I don't share it, then what good is it? You know, I mean, it's I feel like it's my obligation to pass that on to the next generation. You know, and I think most guys that are passionate about it like I am, that have made any kind of name in this business, I mean, I would say the overwhelming majority of the ones that I know are just like me. I mean, they love talking about it, but the one thing they will not do, most of them, and I had to learn this lesson the hard way too, is I'm not going to sit there and talk about it if I don't feel like someone, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but if they're not worthy of it, then no, I'm not going to waste my time. So you got to show me that you're willing that you're a good student, you know, and you're willing to listen and take criticism, take advice, and then put it to good use, you know. And you know, I'm amazed how many young guys will sit down with veterans and talk like they know it all. You know, I just want to say to them, shut the hell up.
No, I think that, you know, you're a student first, and you're a student for a while, and when I think the big thing, when you say something like intangible charisma, I think that's a really good way to put it. And you know, we've had an opportunity to get to know a few people in the New England area who are, you know, have been working the independent wrestling circuit for a while and really putting all of their heart and soul into it. And they're the ones that I tend to believe in a little bit more. And part of that is what you just said. When I take a look at what their schedule looks like in terms of making appearances, I mean, they are making themselves constantly available and chomping at any opportunity to work anywhere, and that and it translates when somebody's really that passionate. It translates, when you go to see them, when you go to watch them at a show, you just know, they're really in it, for the love and the passion, and they want the best, and so it makes it really easy to root for those kind of guys too. And when you root for them,
absolutely,
well, that helps push them along a little bit, right? So, I totally
agree.
Things
that, I hear The Rock, one of his favorite quotes is, stay hungry, stay humble. And I love that quote because here's the thing. You look at, and here's the thing, anybody gets into wrestling's got an ego, me included. But you got to keep your ego in check. And I will tell you right now that there's certain people that I've met along the way who now have built pretty good names for themselves. And not to mention anybody's name, but there's people that I look at with a certain, I don't know, frown, I guess, resentment to I don't know if those are the right words, but I look at them because I was in a locker room with them years ago when they were just starting to get a little bit of notoriety, and they walked around, and I'm in the locker room with me, actually Jake was there, Ricky Morton was there, Tully Blanchard was there, and these guys are walking around like somehow, I don't know if they meant to or not, but they were walking around like they were the superstars. And when I went up and talked to them and I shook their hand, it was like, hey, how you doing? And I'm thinking, look, man, I don't need you to kiss my butt, okay? But I need you to be a professional, and I need you to be a little humble, especially in this company. Not take me out of the equation, but just these other guys, And because, and The Rock is a perfect example. You look at The Rock when he does interviews, when he does just about everything. He's a pretty humble guy. That's his presentation is usually a humble guy until he gets into having fun and being The Rock. But don't think for 1 second that he knows he's a badass and he knows he can deliver. So
right.
But he stays humble, and if that guy can stay humble, by God, anybody else below him, which pretty much makes all of us, can stay humble too. And that's my one big pet peeve. Well, not my one, but it's one of my main ones. Is that I see talent, they get an ounce of success, and it goes to their head. And I try to let them know, and because like I said, I'm at a point in my career where I want to share as much as I can with, the wrestling, the next generation, because like I said, I feel a moral obligation to do that because I had people like Lou share some invaluable information with me. Of course, I ran Dusty's turnbuckle. I was his right-hand guy when he had Turnbuckle Entertainment for the whole 4 years he had that, and learning from those guys. It was invaluable, and what I learned, like I said, if I don't share it, then it kind of dies, and I don't want it to die with me. I want to leave, that information for the next generation. Hopefully, they'll pass it along to the ones after them. But it is. I mean, there's so much to this business as far as a balance of keeping your ego in check, and it's hard. Listen, I went through the greatest period of wrestling ever, and because someone like Lou and other veterans like Mr. Wrestling Number 2, Ted Oates, Bob Armstrong, these guys I had a chance, Tommy Rich, guys I had a chance to get to know earlier in my career, constantly told me, look, your break may never come, and if it does come, it may not last long. So don't let it get to your head. Don't start believing your own gimmick.
Sure. Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, we all lace the boots up the same. We all go out there and. It's like I heard Al Snow say recently in an interview, there's a funny saying in the rest of the business, who do you ever beat? Well, none of us ever beat anybody. We only win because, with who you're working with, allows you to, and that's the thing in the wrestling business is that, it's a very violent dance, and you're only as good as the person you're dancing with, and people sometimes forget that, I'm amazed how many times people forget that.
Yeah.
And, I remember Paul Orndorff telling me one time, he was saying, you want to kill somebody's comeback? On their first bump, roll out the ring. And I'm like, it's just as simple as that,
That's really funny.
And I'm thinking, look at someone like Paul. He should know,
Right.
But yeah, that's just, I think that, because I honestly, Doug, like, I love this business so much. I mean, I hope and pray that I'm a part of it until the day I die, because I really do love it. It's a passion of mine. Hopefully, you can hear that in my voice. And you know, and I've made, one of the things I learned from Paige a long time ago is, you know, one of his favorite sayings is life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And you know, you can't always control what happens to you, but you can always control how you react to it. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give to anybody out there listening, whether you're in wrestling or whatever, is you are always in control of how you react to things. And if you let the situation get the best of you, that's how you're going to be defined. You know, and it's kind of like that old saying, you know, either you define the moment or the moment defines you. And if you let the moment define you enough, then you gain a reputation of being someone that's hard to work with. And then that's not good, no matter how talented you are. You know, so yeah, you know, it's just, you know, stay hungry, stay humble. You know? Yeah. It's pretty simple.
Absolutely. You know, and things like love and passion, like I said earlier, it always comes through. It's something that I've respected about your career, you know, personally, and you can really speak firsthand because, like you said, you know, you got your start in 1986. Not 1987, as we joked about earlier. You know, and so, but it was, I mean, that's 10 years before ever being in a position to be in front of a national audience, you know, and you know, anybody who is reading this probably knows. I just want to ask a couple questions about your years in WCW. You know, Glacier debuts in 1996. My understanding was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you had been talking to Paige about incorporating some of that martial arts background, you know, into wrestling. So, how does that come about? Who do you approach them? Do they approach you with the idea? How does that idea formulate?
Well, ironically, Paige and I had become friends because I moved to Atlanta in 1990 to pursue wrestling full time, but I was teaching school, so it was a perfect marriage for me. Teach during the week, had my weekends and my summers to wrestle and travel, and of course I started going to Japan and wrestling, that's where I met Lou, but yeah, you know, Paige and I became friends because Lex and Sting owned a gym in Atlanta called Main Event Fitness. So of course all the wrestlers, you know, worked out there, and all the wannabe wrestlers worked out there. And at that point, I consider myself not a wannabe, but you know, I wanted to be able to be, you know, a full-time professional wrestler. Obviously, my goal was to get to WCW, and then so Paige and I became friends, and ironically, you know, Disco Inferno was a great friend of mine. Me and him and Bagwell and Riggs all started off about the same time together, you know, around the Atlanta area there, and so we worked for what was called North Georgia Wrestling, and that was what was so great. Like I always say, honestly, Doug, throughout my entire career, I literally was the victim of good timing. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time a lot of my career. And when I was in Atlanta, we were, you know, we did the TV tapes. They paid us $10 a piece usually, but they were out. Joe Pedicino, who was a big name in the wrestling business in the Atlanta area, especially back in the '80s. He in the early '90s, he had a show that was on Saturday night on TV 34 in Atlanta. But once again, this is Atlanta, one of the biggest cities in the country, and of course a hotbed for wrestling because of WCW being out of there. And so he did like 6 hours of regional wrestling, like world class. He had the WWF hour, you know, all this, and we had a 2-hour show that he would sandwich in between all of that, like from 10 to 12. So here we are, you know, in the Atlanta area, and the reason, you know, building pretty good names for ourselves, even though we're broke as hell. but you know, so I got to know Paige through that. He saw my work ethic, and that's something that's really big with Paige is, you know, not how good you are, but also how hard you're willing to work. And we became fast friends, and Disco and I, believe it or not, actually came up with the Coach Bud Stern gimmick before anything to do with the Glacier thing. And Paige liked it. He actually pitched that to Bischoff, and Bischoff was kind of lukewarm on it. So actually, you know, that was what I hoped would be my break into wrestling, you know, into WCW. And then it was Christmas in '95. It was like 2 days before, like December 23rd. Paige and I were in the big mall in Atlanta, Christmas shopping, and we ate, you know, this pizza place. We sat down and ate this pizza place back when Paige actually ate pizza that wasn't gluten-free pizza. And that's when I said to him, I said, Paige, you know, I'm thinking about incorporating some of my martial arts into my wrestling, you know, because I'd never really done it at that point. And he said, and I'll never forget, a big old piece of pizza and he could bite in his mouth and he goes, bro. He goes, that'd be great if you knew some of that crap. And he didn't say crap, he said the other word.
Right.
And I said, no, paint what are you talking about? And I told him, kind of, I've been studying since I was like 15 years old, and he goes, oh, I didn't know all that. He goes, Bischoff's into all that stuff. And so I gave him all much information. He goes, we talked to Bischoff about that. So that's really how the ball got rolling, and we kind of left it like that. And then he talks to Bischoff. Bischoff was interested, and I didn't know at the time that Turner Broadcasting had already pitched the idea to WCW, to Eric, that, hey, they were interested in, playing off of the popularity of Mortal Kombat, the game and the movie that had come out. And so that's kind of how I think I got on Eric's radar. And so right after Christmas, I think it was the first week of January, I had Paige set up a dinner, me and Eric, and and back then Paige and Eric lived only like 2 houses down from each other. And so I went to their neighborhood. There was a steakhouse right down the road, and me and Eric sat down, and kind of we had, honestly, it seemed like about a 3-hour dinner, and all he did was just grill me up and down on questions. I mean, it was a conversation, but it felt like an interview the whole time. And at the end of the year, at this time, Doug, like I had left teaching because one of my other mentors, who's one of the top sports performance coaches in the country, had taken a job at a very, very elite country club, and they had a huge fitness center. He brought me on as fitness director, so I had a pretty good living going. I was doing that and still wrestling as much as I wanted, and but obviously my goal was still WCW. So I wasn't willing to walk away from that for just a petty offer, even if it was WCW. But I wasn't gonna. That was too much to walk away from. It was a nice gig, and so at least for nothing, And so I'll never forget him saying to me, he said, are you working full time now? I said, yes, I am. He said, what are you doing? And I told him, and he said, are you still working on the wrestling on the independent scene? I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, I want to sign you to a contract. He said, I want to pay you to disappear completely from the independent wrestling scene. I remember looking at him, I just said, I could do that.
Yeah, right. That sounds all right to me.
And we didn't talk money or anything to that point, because I said, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll draw up a basic contract, I'll send it over to you, you look at it, you tell me if it meets your approval. And I was like, cool. And, and then, I waited, and, a few weeks went by, and I thought, honestly, I was getting to the point, I was thinking, oh, man, he talked a good game, but it's never going to happen, So I was bugging Paige to death, and then finally, I get this FedEx package with this, letter and this contract, and it was a good contract. It was a lot more than I expected, and so I had to make the hard decision. I did that was in January of '96. I didn't even leave my job until I think it was the end of April of '96. So for 4 months, I canceled all my bookings, and I just shut up. And we would do these crazy midnight meetings, which started to drive people crazy because they knew Eric was meeting with some people about something, and Eric loved that. He loved the secrecy. And of course, that was in the infant stage of the internet. So, nobody really, stuff just didn't get out like that. And so we started having these midnight meetings that I introduced Eric to Andre Friedez, the special effects guy who was just a master of what he does. He's the guy who ended up creating all the costumes. And so we would do midnight meetings at his studio. And so those first 4 months, that's kind of how I got started. And then I left my job and started working on doing it full time, out in the power plant. And we were 5 days a week at the power plant, literally like 10 a.m. to like 4 or 5 o'clock every day. And man, it was like going back to boot camp again.
Yeah, right.
But you know what? I mean, I'm so glad that I never went through the 3-day trial at the power plant. Let me just tell you, I mean, I believe I would have found a way to gut it out, but I'm just telling you that's probably the hardest thing I've ever seen anybody have to go through. And the people who made it through it, which one of my best buddies for the last 20 plus years has been Luther Wilson. He wrestled as Luther Biggs. He went through it at 310 pounds and made it, and only about 10% of the people that ever went through the tryouts made it. And the power plant was something to behold. I always tell when I do seminars, I always ask people how many people have heard of the WCW power plant. And as I get older and wrestlers get younger, I'm amazed some people haven't really heard of it.
Yeah, right.
Which tells me a lot right there. But I always tell them, I go, most of you probably heard the stories about the power plant, and most of them go, yeah, and they usually smile and snicker a little bit. And I say, well, let me tell you this: whatever you've heard about the power plant, I promise you, it was at least that bad, and maybe a little bit worse.
That's good.
But anyway, yeah. So, but yeah. So like I said, I'm so grateful for Dallas, and we became great friends, and we're still great friends. I just saw him in Atlanta about 2 weeks ago, and he actually, I went in to see him, just stopped by to see him, and he was working with Vader. He had Vader in town for a week, really kind of getting him up to par on the DDP yoga. Of course, the story I'm sure most people have heard now about, Vader, with a heart condition. So,
yes.
So you're getting him on track with that, and I will say, I mean, this is my plug for DDP yoga. If anybody, it's been a lifesaver for me. I mean, it has given me a quality of life I never thought I'd have again. And so if there's anybody out there listening that needs something that's a zero impact workout that literally is as good as people say, it's that. And listen, I have a master's degree in exercise science. Trust me, I've seen it all. This is the one thing that I put at the top of the heap. It is that good.
Yeah, well, I've, my wife and I, we have a set at home. I was going to say my wife is not, that privy to professional wrestling in general, but she knows all about Dallas because she had never done yoga before. She's always been into fitness and stuff, but never given yoga a try, and got a set of the DVDs and really enjoys it, and it's remarkable, the work that he's done. And so when I hear about him going into the Hall of Fame, like, obviously, did he have a great career? Absolutely. But all of the work that he's done and so many of the careers that he's impacted is really remarkable.
Yeah, and he said something to me one time that really resonated with me, because when he moved back to Atlanta, he actually invited me to come up, and I actually moved back with him and moved in with him.
Oh, wow.
To help kind of, but help him with Jake, help get Jake back on track and everything. And so, and that's when, Steve Yu, his partner, they actually started shooting the documentary. Back then, they were just shooting footage. And at some point, they were like, you know what? Maybe we should make a documentary about this.
Yeah, sure.
But and I remember one day, me and Paige were talking, and I just told him, I said, because I'm telling you, it is giving me a quality of life, Doug, that I really thought I would not ever have again. And every time that I start to get where I take a few days away from it, I do it again, and just I feel so much better. I mean, and that's the God's honest truth. I mean, I don't get $1 for endorsing DDP yoga, but the one thing this is what resonated with me. They just said a lot of impactful things about DDP yoga. This is the one thing that always resonated with me. Is we were talking after workout one day, and I said, bro, man, this is so great that you've done this, and that this is what you're doing with your life now. I said, man, I mean, you're changing lives. And he said, he looked at me, and of course, he starts and ends just about every sentence with the word bro. he's like, bro, because I don't have any biological children. He said, so I don't have that legacy to leave. He said, I got to leave something that's going to outlive me. And he said, and this is it. And I just thought, man, wow, that's really impactful to think of it that way. Like, he's working his butt off now to help people now, but when that day comes, this will outlive him a lot
Absolutely.
longer, than him. And I mean, he's going to be changing lives even after that, and that's a pretty darn significant thing. I mean, it inspires me.
No, definitely. I mean, it's really, I mean, the guy is quite literally saved some lives, and when you were talking about the quality of the program, it's funny because if she listens to this, she'll laugh, because when I said that my wife enjoys DDP yoga, sometimes she'll get into it for a long period of time, and and then after a while, like, she'll do a few, and she's like, I wonder how much this is helping me. And I say, trust me, it definitely is. And then she'll go for some time without doing it for a while, and then she'll pick back up on it, and she'll go, oh my word, I can definitely tell now that I had some time away from it. Like, I didn't even realize how strong it was making me, that sort of thing.
And I always tell people, and this is kind of the funny part of it, I always tell people, if you can stand Dallas Page's voice for 30 minutes, you'll love the workout.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, speaking of, close friends with Paige, and not to presume, but I know a good friend of his that is somebody that I know that you worked with, and during those years as Glacier, I just wanted to touch two names and have a little feedback from you. One of them I know was very close to Paige, and quite possibly yourself. And when I think about, your foes as Glacier, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, one of the first guys that pops into my mind is Mortis, who was later known as Chris Kanyon, who I also, I really associate closely with Paige. And Chris is a guy who, may get lost among the younger generation of fans. But I know several of us who contribute for TopRopeReport.com agree that, he was a great, if not underrated talent. And, in fact, Eric devoted an entire column to him one week, just his career and whatnot. And, it's well documented that he struggled with some demons, if you will.
Yeah.
And we all know, any wrestling fan knows, what happened. It's very tragic and very sad. But can you tell us, what your experience was knowing and working with Chris?
Oh, yeah. Chris became one of my very best friends, wrestling or otherwise. And me and him and Luther, we had, like any job, you have your cliques. And the wrestling has cliques just like anybody else. And we had our clique. And our clique was guys that really, that Paige had all really kind of helped us get our jobs, And that's just one thing I always say about Paige. It's hard to be Paige's friend sometimes because, sometimes it comes, he's demanding sometimes as a friend, but he's also a loyal friend, and I always say that even during the busiest years of our run in WCW, whenever I called Paige, if he didn't answer, he called me back usually pretty quickly, even when he was as busy as at the top of his career. And so even not now today, but yeah, we have what was called the FOP, which is the name of our clique, which is the Friends of Paige, and it was me, Kanyon, Kidman, Luther Biggs, Big Ron Reese, and a few other guys that later on, the cruiserweights like Shane Helms and those guys who came through, Demi Yang and all those guys, that Chris helped. But that originally that was our crew, and yeah, Chris and I became great friends. We were great friends up until he passed. He really, kind of went into seclusion the last couple of years. I a lot of times I only communicate with him through text, even though I try to call him. He just, he started kind of that downward spiral, and but I always say, that throughout my entire career, by far, I had my best matches of my career with Chris. He was just, we just had this certain chemistry in the ring that you can't teach, and I'm glad it was someone of his caliber, because he made me better every time we went into the ring, and he made me step my game up no matter what. And I believe I did the same for him, and so. And me and Luther, literally Luther and I talk almost every day. There's certain phrases and sayings that because he had that strong New York accent / drawl, whatever you want to call it, and he had some very funny sayings. A lot of them I can't say over the air, but he was I would say he was a character without trying to be a character, and most guys in the wrestling business that find their way into the wrestling business can kind of go into that category. But he was a very entertaining guy to be around, very good friend, very dedicated to the wrestling business, maybe too dedicated, where he became kind of one-dimensional, and he felt like once wrestling he wasn't where he felt like he belonged anymore in the business. I don't know if belonged is the right word. He wasn't where he felt like he wanted to be in the business. That's when I think a lot of the issues kind of, magnified. But yeah, he, even when he came out, we as friends, in our inner circle, we all knew, but we never said anything because at the end of the day, it didn't matter to us. He was still a great guy. He was still a great friend. And I remember when after he did that match with Paige, I think it was in Tampa, he publicly came out. I remember he called me. I remember it was actually over at Luther's place, and he called me and he talked to Luther for a while first, and then he talked to me, and he was like, we still cool? And I started laughing. I was like, what do you mean we still cool?
All
of course
right.
we are. And he goes, I go, bro, I've known him for a long time. And he literally gets mad at me. He's like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. And I was like, yeah, bro, I did. And he goes, how did you know? And I'm like, Kanyon. I was like, you're a star. You're on TV. We live in Atlanta. And at this point, it was a great time to live in Atlanta. The Olympics had been there and all this stuff. I go, man, you're on TV 4 days a week. You're a star. And you never go out with any girls. I anyway, dude, it's not hard to do the math, you know. But you know, but the thing is none of us cared. Honestly, we didn't care. I didn't care one bit. And I just remember like him saying, you know, like so like that doesn't change things between us. And I remember laughing and just saying, like, no, but it doesn't change anything between us. I was like, let's just make a deal. How about this? I won't push being straight on you if you don't push being gay on me. How about that?
that's a great way to put it.
And he was like, deal. and then we honestly never spoke of it again, you know. And so, and you know, I love the guy. I miss him terribly. I can tell you, Doug. I mean, I so wish he was here, you know, because to give you an example, when I went to see Paige the other day, Paige just put in the physical therapy room in his performance center, and that's where Vader was actually, you know, warming up. And the first thing he said to me after our hellos was, he said, look at this place. He goes, because Kanyon was a physical therapist before the WCW run, and not a lot of people know that. And he was a licensed physical therapist. And that's what Nate said. He goes, man, you know, Kanyon could be here overseeing all this. And I was like, I know, man, I know, you know. So, yeah, you know, I can honestly tell you there's not a single day that goes by that I don't genuinely, my heart doesn't ache, and I genuinely, you know, I miss him. I miss him a lot.
Yeah, he was a favorite of mine, you know, and yeah, he'll never be lost on me. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I'll always.
But I tell people, I tell the young wrestlers all the time. I just tell them, I go, if you want to see someone who was pretty darn close to, you know, there are few people that I can say I never remember them having a bad match. Brad Armstrong is one of them. Kanyon's another one. I mean, you know, now he was the hardest critique of his own stuff, but I never, ever remember seeing him have a bad match. You know, I mean, he pushed himself to a level that most people, he never phoned a match in, you know, and I feel proud to say I don't feel like I ever have either, but you know, he was a very high level wrestler, especially to be 6'4", 250, 260, you know, I mean,
sure.
The guy can move, you know, and yeah, he's a great example of, and that was, you know, he and I, you know, by order of Eric Bischoff, I mean, we were ordered to basically, that's one of the things Eric said was, I want you guys, especially you two, but obviously Brian Clark and Ernest too, but I want mainly, because we were the workhorses of the group. I mean, you know, because we wanted to be, you know, we gladly took on that responsibility, and he said, look, I want you guys to be the first heavyweights that move like cruiserweights. And for us, and it's one thing I always tell younger wrestlers, go back and watch it. I'm not saying just because it's me and him. It's because we cared so much about it, and we got advice from people like Jody Hamilton, who was the head of the original Masked Assassin, who was the head of the power plant, from Paul Orndorff, from Larry Zbyszko, from Bobby Heenan, guys who were master storytellers in the ring. We went to them, and we were like, okay, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? And I was so proud of, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of with what we did was we always played it straight, even though we were wearing these costumes that, you know, looked a little out of place with NWO and everything taken off. But we always played it straight. We never made fun of it. We never made it comedic. And we went out there and we went hard, and we sold as much as we you know, delivered. And that's something I feel like is really lost today is guys girls don't sell. And when you don't sell, the believability goes away. You know, you got to sell. You know?
You're right.
And so anyone who's in the wrestling business who's listening to me, you know what I mean. Don't forget to sell.
That's great, man. Hey, you know, I've got about 2 more for you if you're up for it. So
yeah, my buddies over there that are about almost through their cigars are waving at me, but I told them to give me a few more minutes.
All right, I got two more here, and you know, and you know, you were just kind of talking about it, but you know, when you were referencing the age of the NWO, and you know, you had an opportunity to share miles and share locker rooms with guys during what is now called and, you know, and remembered fondly as the Monday Night Wars. Now, you know, for me as a fan at the time, it was, I don't think I was thinking about brand loyalty or anything. I just always watched WCW. It was just what I watched. So I, you know, so I was never thinking about it like that. And for the guys who were there, you know, I've heard various stories. Some people say, you know, the war was real and the battle was real. And then I hear other people say, look, when you're there, you don't even know the importance of what you're doing at the time. or the importance of the era that you're wrestling in at the time, kind of you can't see the forest through the trees kind of thing. So just give me a vibe. Like, what was the vibe in the locker room like during those years?
That's a great question, Doug. And I've thought about that a lot over the years. And I can tell you honestly, the answer is, in my opinion, it was pretty much an even split. I remember definitely those days when we'd have to be at the arena around usually 1 o'clock, and there'd be catering, and I can remember those days. And there was a period there where it was every Monday where Eric would come in and he would give this, Bear Bryant type speech of, we got to step it up. Even if we had a pay-per-view the night before, he was like, this is war. We got to step it up. I mean, I remember I was there in that day. He said, I want to drive this same man out of business. And we're all thinking, why?
Right.
Competition's good. Let's just beat him in the ratings every Monday night. How about that? And I think that was a little bit of Eric kind of getting too consumed with all of it. But so yeah, there were those days when we were expected to. There was a period, not days, but there was a period where literally, we would, Kidman and I, he was my travel buddy for most of the time I was in WCW, Billy Kidman, and man, we'd come out of there and we'd almost laugh like, how the hell are we supposed to step it up from what we did last week?
Right.
And so yeah, there was some of that, and I think that was just, Eric is a very, very competitive person, and most people know that by now about him, and I'll always be thankful for Eric for giving me my break, and there was a time when I was pretty bitter at Eric for some things, not personally, but just kind of the way he handled certain things in his career. He and I kind of, we met up at a convention a couple years ago, and everything was great, So, but I think a lot of people we all went through different emotions during that period, but yeah, there was definitely that sense of like somehow, some way, we got to step it up even more than we did last week, and that was, I know, from the young guys, and I'm talking about the guys that were the Billy Kidman, the Chris Kanyon, the Chris Jericho, the Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Benoit, those guys. We were. I know how much those guys cared about wrestling like I did, and we all took it very seriously. Like, all right, damn it, if the other guys, that are above us don't want to act like that, then we're not going to leave it to them. We're gonna do our job. We're gonna make them work harder because we're gonna be as damn good as we can be. And they're gonna have to outperform us. So it was a lot of in my opinion, there was a pretty strong competition within the company. Go out there and your goal is to have the best match on the card, make the other people work hard too, whether they intend to or not. If they're gonna, and you were definitely afraid not to, because there were thousands of people waiting to get our jobs, at that time. And but then there was that other part where it was going so fast. We were wrestling. We were on TV 4 nights a week back then, and then you had house shows, and like you said, yeah, there was a time where you're just, we all used to have a funny saying that, we've been to every major city in the country and haven't seen one of them. It was airport, hotel, arena, hotel, airport.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, there was that time where you felt like you couldn't see the forest, because of the trees. I actually just purchased the new revised edition of the Death of WCW, the book, simply because I wanted to go back and relive all of it, because there's so much I can't remember.
Sure.
And by reading the book, it reminded me of so many things where I was right there for it, but I would never have remembered it unless I had read a documented history of it.
Sure, yeah. No, a lot of those is funny. When you were laundry listing, those names, man, all those guys, those were my guys. That was my love of wrestling, I'm 31. I was born in '85, and so I was relatively young during those years. But
you were, man.
But I gotta say, like, a lot of times when you're a kid and you get into wrestling, yeah, you get into wrestling because you get into X, Y, and Z, and you get into the larger than life personas. But that era there, like when Nitro took off, that was when I really started, appreciating a whole different wrestling for a whole different level. And all those guys that you just named, those are the guys that I watched for. I wasn't watching for the multi-million-dollar superstars. No offense to some of them, but you know what I mean. Like that was what those were the guys that drew me in and really sent my enjoyment of wrestling into overdrive. And
and I can tell you honestly, there was a very real sense of it's us against them, and I don't mean that necessarily a totally negative way, but I mean we knew, because look at who we were. We were the undercard for Macho Man, Ric Flair, Sting, Lex, and then of course all the NWO. I mean, Hall and Nash, and I mean, my God, I mean, and that's why I tell people all the time. Anybody that's like a critic of it. I know you and I were talking off the air earlier today about that's a critic of the Glacier gimmick. One thing I always say is, you know what? That no critic who ever criticized what I did ever signed one of my paychecks.
That's right.
The people who mattered, employed me for 5 years, and that 5-year period was arguably the greatest period of wrestling ever. I mean, I signed in January of '96, and I was there basically to the very bitter end. And my contract expired, I think, 3 months before we got bought out, but I was basically on still a nightly deal, so I was there to the very end. And I can say, I was an active member of arguably, one of, if not the greatest wrestling roster of all time, and that's something that no one can ever take away from me. And I held my own every freaking week after week after week, night after night after night, every Nitro, every pay-per-view, every Thunder, and if I wouldn't have been able to hold my own at that point, trust me, they would have gotten rid of me, just like they would have gotten rid of anybody who couldn't, because, they didn't have to keep anybody just for the hell of it.
Absolutely.
Because of any favor. I mean, you had to, if you were on TV, there were people that were on the payroll that for whatever reason were paid to sit home, and we all kind of heard those stories. But I'm telling you, if you were on TV, like I was, like I said, I mean, I was made to believe that, even though, my contract, we were all made to believe we were week to week,
Sure, yeah.
So, and I felt like I did. I mean, I felt like when it was all said and done that I earned the right to be there during that whole period, and I became great friends with guys like Eddie and like Chris and Jericho and Benoit and Public Enemy and Booker T and Stevie and all those guys. I mean, we all were in it together, and that's really how we felt like, guys, we're in this together. Perry Saturn, Perry's someone who recently, I'm sure most people have seen, he's going through some hard times, and I hate it for him.
Yeah, we just made a contribution to his GoFundMe.
Oh, great. Yeah. And he's someone that I hope I get a chance to see him. I think he's booked here WrestleMania weekend, so I'm really hoping I get a chance to see him, because, once again, he's another guy that I never had a bad match with, and I always, there's that part of me that, like, oh, man, I look forward to wrestling Perry, but, this is going to hurt,
Right.
But you know what? Once again, Perry's one of those guys that brought the best out of me, and I appreciate that, because I that at the end of when it's over, if you really care about what you're doing, you appreciate that, and I did, I always did, and Perry's a guy that he was kind of a Mike Tyson of the wrestling business. I mean, Perry, if he didn't respect you or like you, it's pretty easy to know that. He didn't really make
he didn't hold back.
Right, and so, and we always had a great relationship, and so that meant a lot to me, that a guy of his caliber respected me and liked me, and it was certainly mutual, but a lot of that was because of what we went out there and did in the ring, and so yeah, so that's what I always hang my hat on, and the fact that, like I said, I'm so thankful that, the majority of the people I've run into over the years were fans of the Glacier gimmick, and there's critics just like they are of everything else, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I love hearing it, because it's fun to hear it. I mean, heck, if all sunshine and rainbows, man, it wouldn't be any fun.
That's right.
You wouldn't appreciate TV.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with what you were saying when you were talking about just the quality of the roster and just how special that time was, because. Somebody could say that I'm being biased just because, that was the time frame that you really started to love, professional wrestling. But I look back, I'm also a fan of the history of wrestling, and I look back and I appreciate all these different eras, but I mean it when I say, like, man, that was a really, really special time. And, and so I thank you for that. And, I've got one more question for you, Ray.
Yeah.
And they always say, end strong, and I just can't think of a I can't think of a stronger way to end than this. And you mentioned his name a little bit earlier when you were talking about Turnbuckle, and I was also talking about independent wrestling. We have a great wrestling promotion in Maine that's really blown up in the last 2 years. It's called Limitless Wrestling, and they have an upcoming show. I'm psyched for it, and one of the headliners of the show is Dusty Rhodes' son, Cody. He'll be here. He'll be here for that. And Cody, I'm sure you probably had an opportunity to meet him long before he ever put on a pair of boots, if you knew Dusty from back in the day. But I just want to. This is just an open thing for you. What's your experience and your thoughts with Dusty Rhodes?
Man, I could talk forever. I could do a whole show just on that. So I'll try to, make a couple points to keep it brief. As I said, when I was a kid growing up, in my world, they were outside of my parents. I had great parents, and they were my first heroes. But, my two heroes were Evil Knievel and Dusty Rhodes. I wanted to be both of them at the same time, ironically, when I came into WCW, I never really got to know Dusty all that well. We worked together, but I was kind of terrified of him, because I'm like, it's like a rock star to me, and so I'm not terrified in that sense. I'm scared of him, just I didn't know what to say to him, but he actually oversaw all the vignettes when we shot the Buzz Stern stuff, and that brief period I did that. That's when I really started to get to know him. And then not long after that is when he left in 2000, and he started Turnbuckle, and I actually knew Cody before that, because one of my very best friends, been one of my best friends for over 20 years now, is Steve Day. Steve Day is an unbelievable amateur wrestler. He's in the Amateur Wrestling Hall of Fame. He was Cody's high school wrestling coach. And so he's the one that coached Cody to 2 high school state championships his junior and senior year. And so, I got to know Cody when he was young. I mean, when he was maybe, 15, when I first, hey guys, we're wrestling radio show. My buddies won't buy, but
you're good. You're good.
But so I got to know Cody since he was a kid, and watch him grow up, and actually, Cody went up to LA after high school to be an actor, and Paige kind of helped him get some connections out there, and then he came back, and then I'll never forget, this is when with Turnbuckle that everything had kind of run its course, and I was still in Atlanta right before. Actually, I'd gone to Orlando, and I think I was coming. This was around 05, I think maybe, and it was right right before Cody broke in, and I remember Dusty calling me, and we lived pretty close at that time, and he always called me Raymond. He's like, Raymond, you should come over to my house. And I was like, oh my God, you feel like you're being called to the principal's office, and so he sat me down in the kitchen, and he said, Cody's back. He wants to try his hand at wrestling, and he said, I've got him set up to go train with Harley Race starting, I think it was like February. And this was like October of the year before. And he said, but I got to get him ready for Harley. He said, I got to get him trained. And he said, he ain't going to listen to me. He said, because I'm just dad to him. He said, I want you to train Cody. I trust you that you'll train him right. And to me, Doug, you can imagine. As much as I held Dusty in high esteem, for him to say that to me was one of the defining moments of my life. It really was, because
it's a high compliment.
I idolized him so much. For him to trust me like that with his son, and his training, it just meant the world to me. So we got a ring, we got it set up, and me and my buddy Luther Biggs, who was also working with Turnbuckle a lot, we started working with the Cody, and I was amazed. Because I just thought somewhere along the way probably he would have picked up some stuff just being Dusty's son, but Dusty had not really taught him anything at that point. So we literally started at square one.
Wow, yeah.
And then the rest is kind of history with Cody. I still communicate with Cody. Dustin and I communicate a lot on Facebook. Still close to the family. I went to the memorial service, when he passed, and he was the groomsman of my wedding when I got married back in 2002. And,
really?
I remember in my wedding looking over, literally in the middle of my wedding when I should be thinking about my vows. I'm looking over there and I'm thinking, holy cow, Dusty Rhodes is the groomsman of my wedding. But we, and my dad had passed away in '95. So Dusty really did fill a void for me, like a father figure, and I told him that. He knew that. appointed me as like his right-hand man, like his wingman to help him run Turnbuckle, which meant everything to me. When he went to TNA, he brought me on as a talent agent behind the scenes with TNA. I owe Dusty a lot. Like I said, maybe we can do another show where I can tell you a lot more about Dusty, but
absolutely,
I love him. I wish he were here, like so many people do. You know, I have so many great memories of him, you know, and just, you know, personally and professionally. I remember, you know, when I first got to know him, thinking, oh man, I'm going to be riding with Dusty in these towns, and I learned so much about the wrestling business. He taught me so much more about life than just, I learned more about life than I did the wrestling business. Learned a lot about the wrestling business too, which is cool, but you know, he was just that guy that kind of could give that sage advice, and you know, like, and he was a great storyteller. It's like Cody said at his memorial service, one of his dad's best philosophies was never let the truth get in the way of a good story. You know? so Dusty might teach you a lesson by telling you a story that may or may not be true, and he's never going to tell you one way or the other.
Right. Oh man,
but that was kind of the thrill of knowing Dusty. You know? But yeah, I love him and I miss him. I miss him a lot. I really do. You know.
Well, we're gonna have a great opportunity to meet and talk with his son Cody in just 8 days from now, and really looking forward to that. You know, but yeah, Dusty, man, it's really remarkable. If you made a list of how many people that guy impacted, it's like just right up all through his entire life, right up to the very end. It's remarkable. Yeah, but,
and you know, I'm on that list. You know,
yeah, most
and you know, and I live so much of the philosophies that he taught me. I mean, I just they still apply to my life, and I hear his voice all the time. You know, giving me advice, and like I said,
well, it's hard not to hear his voice, right?
Respectful way, yeah. Because I think he was especially when Turnbuckle came along, he was a father figure to a lot of us. He really was, you know. And I'm so grateful to his family for allowing him the time and energy to be that to us, you know, because he was still trying to be a husband and a father to them, you know, and they've always been so gracious, you know, with him being their dad, you know, and being Dusty Rhodes, but yeah, you know, I mean, but definitely when you see Cody, tell him I said hello, tell him Coach Day said hello, and tell him I got a project that I'll get in touch with him about that we may want to work together on. And I'll tell him I'll fill him in later.
I will most certainly do that.
And it's not a wrestling project; it's something else. But anyway, well, yeah, Doug. Well, listen, man, I hate to run. I got to go.
No, I was just we were wrapping things up. Ray.
But I would love to come back on anytime you have room for another guest. Even if you have a last minute cancellation, you know, feel free to give me a call, and if I'm available, I'd be glad to jump on and help you. Well,
Ray, I mean that was great to have you, and like you said earlier, you know, when it comes to wrestling, it's endless, and so we'd definitely love to have you on again.
Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate it, man. I'd love to be on. I'd be honored to come back and talk again.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, Doug. Well, thank you, man, and best of luck with the show. If there's anything I can ever do to help you guys promote it, just let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you.